What's up, y'all? It's Shuffle, and today we are doing a new player guide for Darkest Dungeon. Now, mine is not the only one out there, so if mine does not meet your needs, definitely feel free to go check out the other ones that are out there. There are quite a few good ones. The one I will recommend if you are like a complete, absolute, need your handheld from start to finish for like every single mechanic type of guide, then I would suggest Surix Plays. I will link her guide below. I thought that was a pretty good one. So I'm going to cover some of the same stuff, but I'm going to try and do it from my angle, and I'm also not going to go as in-depth into like the most basic stuff because I'm going to assume that some of the RPG elements are probably familiar to you, so they won't be like a big mystery that I have to explain. So with Darkest Dungeon, and you being a new player, we're going to talk about the difficulty that you should start on. We're going to talk about some of the controls because there are quite a few hotkeys that make your life more easier. There are a lot of things to the game like nuances and some of the stuff in battles or with heroes that are worth talking about. I'll talk about some of the stats that should be explained in a little more detail, the effects, skills, like what skills to prioritize, or like how to build a singular character, and then buildings and towns, so some basic town management. Talk about the heroes themselves, how to build teams, how to pick missions, how bosses work, and then we'll go through an example battle and probably an example camp, and then we'll explain how the entire game plays over the entire playthrough. So I hope you enjoy it, and we will get started. Henceforth, we will actually go into Darkest Dungeon. I had to tab in here. I had my notes off screen. So obviously this is the main screen. If you want to change your options, you can come here and then just mess around there. There's a lot of stuff. There's some things that really change the game, like, where is it? Where's the gameplay? Oh, whatever. Yeah, there are some gameplay options that you can turn on or turn off. So just be aware of that, like taking off corpses and stuff. So with the campaign, you're going to start here. I'm just going all the way to the bottom. I have a lot of files. If you have DLC installed, this is going to pop up. If you are doing it for the first time, I would suggest turning pretty much everything off except maybe the classes, just so you can have fun with those. Crimson Court is pretty difficult in terms of just compared to the base game. It's actually very challenging, and it adds a lot that you really can't ignore in the playthrough. So if you feel overwhelmed with this on, or just overwhelmed with the game in general, and you have Crimson Court, probably turn it off, because you can still use Flagellant and not have to go to Crimson Court. But once you do one playthrough, or if you get comfortable with the game, then I would definitely recommend turning this on, because it's really fun. Otherwise, all of this impacts the game in some way. Musketeer is a double of Arbalest. She has like one major difference besides style choice, so you don't have to run her. And this is asking if it's my first estate. Obviously not. And then when you pick a difficulty, if you don't have Crimson Court, you'll actually get Stygian here for this choice. This is hard mode, or I think it was originally New Game Plus. Stygian and Blood Moon are interesting because you can actually get a game over here. So if you lose X amount of heroes, or if you take too long to finish the game, you get a game over. The other two game modes, you cannot lose. You can always restart, you can always get new heroes and start over. Radiance is interesting. I've heard complaints about Radiant because your heroes level up a bit faster, and you can take higher level heroes to low level areas, because usually you get bracketed in terms of who you can take where. So Radiant builds some bad habits, and also characters level up too quickly, and sometimes it's hard to gear them out for their appropriate missions. So I've actually heard some complaints on Radiant, and I would actually recommend you start on Darkest, just because the stats for the enemies don't change in Darkest compared to Radiant. It's just you can take stronger heroes into dungeons, which makes Radiant a little more forgiving, but honestly Darkest isn't that much harder, so I would actually recommend starting here. Do not start on Stygian or Blood Moon, just because you want to learn the game. You don't want to have a game over, you know, like 30 weeks in and go, okay, I don't know anything. So it's better to just play Darkest and learn the game, and then you can move to a harder difficulty, or still start on Radiant, it's fine. But I'm going to start here on Darkest. And then you can name it whatever you want, obviously. You call it the Darkest Tutorial. Your icon here shows what difficulty you're on, so this is obviously a Darkest file. And for DLC, we have everything on. I should have turned off Musketeer, but it's not a big deal. So I'm going to start this, and I'm actually going to skip the tutorial thing here, because, you know, I want you to see that on your own time. Loading, loading, loading. The Old Road. I am very familiar with this place, because I've had to restart so many times. So when you start the game, you obviously get these two characters, and there's a lot going on the screen at the same time. You have skills, you have stats, you have gear, you have a big inventory, you have a map. So with the map, you can actually swap between your map and your inventory by pressing tab. I do this all the time. Very handy, very nice. And so the torch, we'll talk about this in battles, but the torch is very important. When I see new players playing this game, the most common reason I see them dying, if they are dying, is they don't have the torch maxed out. So the lower this goes, the more dangerous the enemies get, but also the greater benefits, like you get more loot and stuff. So there are ways to manipulate this in your favor, but usually if you're just starting out, you want to keep the torch maxed. So torch is an inventory item you can take with you. You just hit it, you get bonus to light meter. That's how it works. So with this, when you're moving around, you have hallways, which are this thing here, so these little tiles. And then you have rooms. So in hallways, I know this is big information dump, so I apologize, but in hallways, there are a few different things that can happen. There are either battles, there are hunger checks, so the game checks to see if you have food on you so your heroes can eat. They also heal when they do this. If you have no food, they starve and they take damage and they can actually die, so be careful. So there are fights, hunger checks, curio, which are things you can interact with, and then I guess those qualify as events. And there are also traps, or there can be nothing at all. So there are quite a few things that can happen in hallways, and you can't normally see what's in a hallway on the map. You can see it if you get closer, unless it's a battle or a trap or a hunger check. You can't see those things, but you can see curio, which is nice. And you can see what's in the hallways if you scout it. But when you want to move forward, you have to pick a room, and you have to move in that direction. So it doesn't matter where you click, as long as you click a room. You know, if there's a room going the other direction, if I click this one, I just walk forward to this one. So when you move forward, you can click with the mouse and hold it down, or you can use D. So WASD applies here, but you don't really use S for anything. So I'm going to hold D and walk forward. This is our mock battle here. So we got a surprise, which you can tell what this icon is. So obviously it's like, what the hell's happening? If you get a surprise, that means that no matter what I do or how fast my characters are, I have 1 speed. And this guy has 3 speed, if you can see it down there. It doesn't matter what his speed is, I'm always going before him. So surprises are very powerful. But the other flip side of that is if you surprise a full team of enemies, and you don't kill or stun them, so you go first, and then, you know, you do all your stuff, and they're all alive, they actually have 4 turns back to back, which can be very painful. So you have to make sure that you kill or stun things when you're getting a surprise round. So we have our skills here. Sorry about that. Had a dog attack. Not a dog attack, but just dogs barking. Your heroes get to pick 4 of 7 skills, and this is very detrimental or determinant to how your characters play. So if you play someone like Highwayman, who is this character here, he's a bandit or a thief, whatever you want to say. He has quite a few melee abilities, and he has quite a few range abilities. So he has 2 different ways to do damage. Actually, he has a lot of ways to do damage, but you have to pick your combination here to decide how he's going to play, which is a pretty fun way to build characters. And then obviously Crusader here has his own 4. You can't change these in the tutorial, which kind of sucks, but when you get to town, you can change them after a couple weeks. That's kind of nice. So with our attacks here, since this dude's up front, we can't use any of the moves that hit behind him. You can tell where your moves can hit by the colored dots above the names. So obviously you're the yellow ones, they're the red ones. And there are 4 positions in the teams. So you're going to hear me refer to these a lot. And the way you can know what they are is you either hear the word rank 1, for instance, or position 1. And so for your team, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4 down that way. So that's the front of your party to the back of your party. And then the enemy positions go the opposite direction, but it's the same idea. So they're 1, 2, 3, 4. The back line, which is what we call 3 and 4, these are usually the more threatening enemies on the enemy team. Not all the time, but usually you want to get rid of the back ones if they are there instead of the front ones, because the front ones are a little more slower. Usually they just do damage. It's always the support units or other nasty foes that sit in the back. So we don't have anything to shoot back here with our pistol shot, because you can see it can't hit this first dude here. So we're just going to use Open Vein, which is a bleed attack, has a cool debuff. And for the chance here, you'll notice it says 100% base chance to bleed. It's not exactly guaranteed. So it accounts for the enemy's resistance, and it's just an additive type of property. So if my bleed chance is 100% and the enemy's bleed resist is 20, then you just subtract the resist from the chance, and my chance to do bleed to this guy is actually 80%. So the effects are pretty easy to understand. Like moves your enemy or your people around or their people. Stun makes you skip a turn. Blight and bleed are damage over time, so like poison and bleeding. And then debuff is a lot of random things that impact your stats. So this here does bleed damage, so it's 2 points over 3 turns, which means it's 6 damage, so you can always find out how much damage you're doing. DOT is pretty nice as a damage type. It's one of my favorites, and we're just going to hit this dude with Open Vein. Hopefully we bleed him. The odds are, in fact, in our favor. Nice, got the bleed and the debuff. So if you see here, like if I use Smite, your damage is 6 to 12, so there are a lot of dice rolls in this game. So you have chance to hit, you have crit, and then you have damage rolls, so it's all the time just rolling dice, trying to see if you're going to hit for max damage, crit, miss, that kind of thing. So we're going to usually side with something that has more accuracy. And this here, since he's taking 2 damage and he has 5 life, damage over time is applied to their turn. I probably should have explained this too. So you can tell when someone has an action if you look at the little gold bar icon on the screen. So my people have already gone, so I lost this icon, but this unit has not gone yet, so the icon is still there. Actions remaining 1. Usually most enemies just have 1, but there are bosses that can have 2 or sometimes even 3 actions, and that changes how you fight them. But every time an enemy takes an action, they take 1 instance of damage over time, and our debuffs only last for 3 rounds. So every time it takes an action, these both go down by 1. And right here, since he's taking 2 damage on his turn, he's going to have 3 effective HP after this, and this move hits minimum 3 damage, so if I hit him with this, he's just dead. It doesn't matter what else happens. And this also has more accuracy than I think my other 2 moves, by 5%. So I'm going to take the move that has more accuracy and a guaranteed chance to kill. We hit for the minimum damage, so that was good. And he bleeds out on his turn. Obviously you get goodies. It's usually just money. Sometimes you get trinkets, which are equipment. So this is a curio. You're walking through the hallway. Sometimes these actually pop up on the map. I'm going to walk back actually so you can see it, right? So curio shows up as blue, fight show up as red, treasure can show up as yellow. Hunger checks you actually can't see, but they're technically green. There's an actual image file for them. So we're going to walk up to this tent, and it says someone's recently camped here. So you can do something. You can check inside the tent. You can ignore it, or sometimes you can use an item to try and interact with the curio event. And this has a lot of interesting outcomes because the item you choose can dictate what the curio does. Sometimes it can just break it, like you take 100 stress damage or something, which is, you know, nuts. Or it'll be like, this is trapped, and then you pour anti-venom into it and it disarms the poison, then you can loot it. So curio are pretty fun. A lot of the ways to safely get through them are kind of self-explanatory. You know, sometimes something weird goes through it, like a certain thing in the cove that I'm sure people who know what it is. I'm not going to spoil it right now. But for this, we don't have any items to use, so we're just going to hit this. Some valuables. More gold, always welcome. See, our torch is going down too. So as we walk closer to this door, the torch has gone under 75%. So every little tick here is 25. And it changes what's happening. So it's just a percentage, pretty easy to understand. And the further down it goes, the more damage the monsters do. It's not just crits. At a certain point, they get extra damage. And then stress is something we haven't talked about yet, but your heroes accumulate stress. And so the lower the torchlight gets, the more stress they take. And then the player loses more advantage. So we lose dodge, we lose scouting, and sometimes we lose other stuff, but other interactions happen, like the monster surprise manipulates. Loot goes up the lower the torchlight gets. So there are a lot of advantages to lowering it, but it gets more dangerous. And it's weird too, because even though this goes from 100 to 0, and every bracket of increment isn't that much of a big jump, except torchless. So pitch black is when you have 0 lights, and I'll show what that looks like afterwards. And when you get to pitch black, that is when the game is the most dangerous. The enemy gets a massive damage bonus. You get surprised all the time. You take a ton of damage. They hit really hard. So pitch black is a very dangerous situation to put yourself in, so you're trying to avoid that. But what's interesting about it is at max torchlight, the game is still challenging but pretty tame in terms of what's happening with the enemy. And then you go down a little bit, you don't notice too much of a change. You go down a bit further, you don't notice a change. Like, you do notice some change, but not like a massive change. So each increment is only small in terms of how it scales up. But it's interesting because the difference between 100 light and 50 light is pretty noticeable. The difference between 100 light and pitch black, very noticeable. It is a different game by playing in high torch and pitch black. So it's interesting how the light meter works, and this is what I was saying before, that a lot of players lose track of this thing and they just let it go down to 30 or 20, and the monsters already get a huge damage boost. Their party gets surprised and like, man, I'm just dying, this game is hard. So if you're having trouble in this game, try and keep the torch maxed out and see if that changes anything for you. So we're going to open this here. We did not hit a hunger check, so we still have our food. Pretty cool. For the doors, by the way, you can click to go in the doors or hit W. I hit W in that case, but you can always just click to do stuff. And so we didn't get a surprise, which means we have to account for their speed. And if you notice here, Highwayman has 7 speed. So he's got a quirk, which is a passive stat boost, so he's got 7 total. And then this guy has 6. Even though he has 6 and I have 7, I am not guaranteed to go before him ever. The way speed works is it rolls a dice that's 1 to 8 and then adds their speed modifier on top of it. So if you're within 8 points of an enemy, that means that they can roll like, you know, an 8 and you can roll a 1 and they can go before you. Or sometimes it could be like a 6 and a 2. It could be something that simple. Or 6 and a 4, who knows? But if you have higher speed and enemies still go before you, it just means that you lost some dice roll that you can't see. So I know it kind of sucks, but if you're wondering how that works, that's actually a very important thing to know. So usually having like 2 to 4 speed more than an enemy means that you're consistently going before them. So you're trying to have that much at least, but speed's very important, and that's something else. So we need to start killing these things. So we have a big bandit. So if you notice here, this dude is super big, right? And this little portrait here, or the thing above its bar, we only have this one thing for the bar. This looks like it has 2, right? So this is a bigger enemy. This takes up 2 spaces on the enemy's field. So if this enemy team had a second unit, it would just be these 2 in the back and this guy up front, and they can't have a 4th unit. So bigger units are more dangerous in some senses, but not as dangerous in others. Like, they're a little easier to focus fire down. They're less efficient on turns because you get 1 less turn because you have just some bigger units. And you can do other things to bully them, so it's kind of nice. But they have a lot more life, and they're very hard to chew through. So usually they get a few attacks off, even if you get crits and stuff like that, where, like, I could crit this dude and he's just gone. But it would take 1 or 2 crits to get through this. Well, not 1. It would take 2 or 3 crits at the power level that I have to get through this. And we're going to just start doing damage. I'm going to use the melee attack. Although, actually, let's show off the range attack. So, you see here, there are things to consider. My chance to hit is 95% against this bandit. 95% is the hit cap. You can't get to 100, but you always have a +5 bonus. So you can always have a technical chance to hit things. So if you're familiar with like tabletop games where like a nat 20 is a guaranteed hit, it's kind of that thing. So you always have a 5% chance to hit. So even if you have 0, you can still hit stuff. So that means that the hit cap is 95 because it always adds 5% to your total. So that's pretty cool. And we have a guaranteed hit here for bleed damage and 5 to 9, some solid crit. Or you could shoot this dude back here. Usually, like I was saying before, the enemies in the back are a little more threatening and they're not as durable oftentimes. There are some strong, tanky backline enemies, but they're not that common. So this dude back here, my chance to hit him is much lower. It's 78 instead of 95 for the same 5 to 9 damage. Although I do have a higher crit modifier. So I can choose to either try and hit this guy a couple times, because if we look at my Crusader, this is a melee attack, this is a range attack but only hits the front, this is another melee attack, and this is a buff. So my Crusader has no way to hit this guy. So it's either I choose to split my damage over 2 targets, or I choose to just all in this dude and try and kill this guy after. So I would normally actually all in this person just because killing things quickly is the easiest way to win fights, but I'm going to use a range ability here. I also have a third option where I could use this attack. This is an area of effect attack, so AoE, and it's got much lower accuracy, but I could hit both of these guys if I really wanted to, but I'm not feeling that, so I'm just going to hit this. Alright, he didn't dodge me, so that's nice. Then he gets his turn. So his move hits both, so he has an AoE gunshot. This is an AoE whip attack. And now we took stress damage. And we took a bleed here, and we got a debuff. So these are going to start going down on our turns, so we need an action. Even though we're on round 1, we need to get to round 2 to get rid of these, or start wearing these down. There are items you can pick up that get rid of these, but we don't have any right now. So my choices for Crusader right now are I can hit him with just solid melee attack of 6 to 12. I can use this move, which does 4 to 8. It's not that good. Or I can do a bit less damage and have a chance to stun him. So his stun resist is 50, and my stun chance is 100. So that means I have a 50-50 chance of stunning this dude, so I have a coin flip. I could use this buff, but usually buffs like this are too slow for a battle like this. Like, this would be better if the fight's going to last a long time. This fight's probably going to be about 4 rounds, so I don't really need this right now. So I could try and stun him, which slows him down. That's pretty nice. Or I can just go in for damage. I'm going to try and stun him one time. I never get this stun. So let's see if the camera helps me. It did. Cool. So I stunned him, which is nice because he can do a lot of damage. So if I stun him, I'm skipping his next turn, which means I have more time to get rid of this guy. So I do 5 to 9 damage. He has 6 life. I have a small chance to not kill him if I hit. Alright, we got it. And so he left a corpse. Corpses are interesting because they have hit point values, and you can get rid of them, you know, kind of easily. There are some attacks that just get rid of them instantly, but the corpses are there so that the enemies can still hold their positions, like their best positions at times. So like if there's an archer back here, or like let's say a second gun bandit was behind this guy, that means this gun bandit doesn't get shoved up here, and if I kill this, the gun bandit's up here where it's much weaker. So the corpses really help the enemy keep their formations. So you always have to be aware of corpses. The way to not deal with corpses is obviously there are skills that remove them instantly, but if an enemy dies to bleed or blight or a critical hit, they do not leave a corpse. It's actually weird that it works that way. Critical hits I understand, but bleed and blight leaving no corpse is just odd. I don't know why that's a thing, but it's nice. It does help. So sometimes you do want to leave corpses, and sometimes you want to get rid of them. So it's really about experience at that point. So this guy's got 31 HP. Like I said, it's going to take me a couple turns to get through him. 12? Okay, we hit max damage. That's pretty good. Oh, and then also, it's really hard to chain stun enemies because every time there's recover from a stun, they get stun resist buffs for 1 round. If I was able to stun this guy a second time, as hard as it is, especially right now, but later on with like better abilities and trinkets and stuff like that, it is pretty realistic to stun something like this a second time. Instead of this being plus 50, it goes up to plus 100. And that's because stuns are very powerful, so the game is trying to make sure you can't just lock someone down indefinitely, because that would be pretty unfair. So we're going to go to our melee bleed skill here. And we got the bleed. He may die this turn. Nice. Healing some stress for killing units. Finishing the mission. You can go back to town immediately, or you can stay and do stuff. So if you have more map that you want to explore, and like get loot, or do some extra fights and stuff like that, you can go do that. You don't have to like retreat immediately. But I'm going to try and open this. It says trapped. If I had an item, like if I had a key, I could open this safely, but I don't. So I'm going to show you. It's trapped. Ah! Now I took blight damage. Thankfully, all damage over time effects go away when you go back to town, and also your HP instantly recovers. So that's not a big deal. The stress damage, though, that does not go away. This is much harder to heal, and it's kind of like the wear and tear of your units, but you can get rid of it. There are plenty of ways to get rid of it. We're going to talk about stress now, because stress is a very important mechanic in this game. So stress is shown by the bar that is normally clear, and it slowly fills up with little white blocks under your character's health bar. And stress has a few different important things to talk about. So When you are at 0 to 100 stress, your character's fine. Obviously, higher stress levels are more dangerous because once you hit 100 stress, you get something called a resolve check. So once you get the resolve check, it's a dice roll to see if your hero will get afflicted, which means they start to go not quite insane, but they start to act out and start to unravel. So straight up Tokyo Ghoul theme song unravel status. Or they have a chance to go virtuous. The chance baseline to get a virtue is 25%, and the chance to get an affliction is 75%. So it is not in your favor, which means you are trying to not get afflicted. You are trying to not hit 100 stress, which means that between missions, you should be healing your units of stress, or if you are in missions, you should find ways to heal their stress either through abilities or curio. Once your character is virtuous, they stay virtuous until they hit 200 stress, and once they hit 200 stress, so they can go back through 100, they will not make another resolve check, and if they hit 200, they will reset back to 0 stress, and they will lose their virtue. There are some applications to this, but virtuous is really nice because it's all just beneficial stuff. Your resists go up, and depending on what virtue proc you get, like what effect you get, so either focused or courageous, for example, your hero gets to do different things on their turn. It's just random. You know, sometimes they heal, sometimes they buff. It's all very cool stuff. Afflictions are more dangerous. So a virtue is interesting because if you get one virtue, you can actually turn a run around that was in dire straits. So it's very powerful. Likewise with an affliction, if your character's afflicted, like a single affliction can destroy a run. Usually one isn't quite enough. It has to be one and then like some mistakes or maybe a bad team or some unlucky dice rolls that will finish a team off. But honestly, depending on how long the mission is, one afflicted character can ruin it entirely, or sometimes one afflicted character can afflict another character, and then two afflicted characters have a chance to just kill everyone. Like, it gets that dangerous to have afflictions. When a character is afflicted, just like virtue, they get a special state. So sometimes it's fearful, irrational, paranoid. They're like different afflictions, and they all do different things. It's just too much to talk about at one time, but they're all bad. Even some of them have upsides like extra speed, but it's mostly just bad. When they are afflicted, they can do a bunch of stuff. They can hit your other teammates. They can move out of position. They can act on their own. So like your Vestal, instead of healing, she could use her judgment ability and zap something, even though you wanted her to heal. They can pass their turn, which is really dangerous. They can mark themselves. Just all kinds of crazy, stupid stuff can happen in afflictions, which is why you're trying to avoid them as best as possible. So I've explained that. You can kind of see how it can unravel your team, right? So if you get one person afflicted, they can pass their turn, like Vestal passes their turn, doesn't heal someone, and then someone dies. That is a very real and common scenario with Vestal getting afflicted. It sucks. Another one is if they hit another unit, they can debuff them, or they can bleed them, or they can just hit them hard enough to put them to death's door, or they can move out of position and put someone up front, and they can get hit and die. So afflictions are dangerous, and having one can ruin your entire team and your mission. The ways to avoid affliction and stress buildup: there are trinkets that help reduce it. There are abilities that heal stress in battle or in camp, which are really nice. There are curio that heal stress, which is very nice. And otherwise, the best way to deal with stress in a dungeon is to have teams that are really good at preventing stress as well as healing it. So you don't always need a stress healer. Sometimes a stun is good enough because a stun blocks 25 stress instead of healing 12, for example. And as long as you're building strong teams, the only time you would see an affliction is if you make some mistakes or, like I said, some bad dice rolls. The good part is, though, once you leave a dungeon, if you are afflicted, you have to heal them with a facility, most likely. You can take them to another mission, but it's kind of dangerous. And once a character hits 0 stress, they're no longer afflicted. So if you can take them to the Abbey, for instance, and have them stress heal, they can go back down to 0, which is nice. Or if you have a lot of stress healing in your team and camping, for example, you can actually get someone back down to 0 stress over a few different battles in the dungeon, especially if you have camping. It takes a lot of work, and you have to stall quite often to get enough turns to do it, but if the dungeon is long enough and you have the right team, you can actually heal afflictions through the dungeon. It's not common, but it is pretty nice. So once you hit 0, the affliction's gone, the character's back to normal. The other reason stress is dangerous, it's not just the afflictions and stuff like that, it's the fact that stress damage is pretty hard to heal off. You have some abilities that can heal it, you have camp skills, but when you get back to town and you want to heal stress, those facilities cost usually the most money. The only thing that's more expensive is locking in quirks. Sometimes quirk removal is a little bit cheaper, but quirk removal is still kind of expensive. Otherwise, if you need to heal stress, especially like the high cost areas, it's going to cost you like 1,500 or 2,000 gold. It's very expensive to get rid of stress, and it's lasting damage. It slowly goes down between weeks if the hero's not going on missions, but it still costs a lot of money or a lot of time either in battles or outside of battles in order to heal it. Which means it is in your best interest to keep your stress as low as possible. Alright y'all, that's going to do it for this one. Thanks for watching. Make sure you're following on Twitch and joining Discord if you have not already. And if you want to support the channel, there is a Patreon, so that's pretty cool too. And next time we will talk about Hamlet management and some roster and how to build teams. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.